to bring up to the stage Daniel Debow, Jeff Thompson, and the moderator Patrick Keefe. Come up to the stage, guys. I keep screwing your last name with that.
No worries.
Sure, Dan.
What's that? Oh, we're back.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Second last panel of the day, so it's going to be a good one. We've got two entrepreneurs who've recently sold companies. So the process is fresh in their minds. We're going to talk about the acquisition process. So here's my plan. I'm going to get these guys to just quickly introduce themselves, talk a little bit about the companies. I know you met Dan earlier this morning if you were here. I got a couple questions and I want to turn it over to you guys. So think about what you want to ask these guys. So Dan, I know you were up here earlier, but for those that might not have been here, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and Ripple and just the high level process that you went through.
Okay, sure. So Daniel Debow, I'm from Toronto. Been through the sales process on two companies. The first was a company I was on the founding team called WorkBrain. And I started in 2000, and by 2007 we had sold it to Infor. It was a public company, so it was a very different process in terms of selling it, but by the time we got there, we got an IPO, so we ended up selling it. That was a very interesting process that was much more like the traditional formal auction sales process. And then the other was Ripple. I started a company called Ripple, which was sold very quickly, I think in three and a half years to Salesforce. And that was sort of a very different process because we were definitely not looking to get bought. So I can go into more detail, but that's basically, I've seen two different sides of it.
Awesome.
For those I haven't met, Jeff Thompson from Fredericton, New Brunswick. Two exits under my belt. One was actually engineered from day one of starting the company. We had a 5-year plan. We exited in 31 months. We'll talk more about that throughout the panel. Dove back into the startup scene after a couple of years and recently exited to a cloud CTI provider in San Francisco. That one was not planned, came completely out of the blue in one of those sales calls that resulted in the ultimate sale. So a bit of an exit junkie as much as I'm a startup junkie, it seems, and seem to have a hard time keeping things longer than 30 some odd months. But anyway, great to be here.
Great. So first question, and I'll start with you, Dan. So how does it actually work? I guess you've been through two exits. Let's talk about Ripple. Does somebody call? Are you sort of teasing potential acquirers? What got the process started? Your head's down, doing all the things that you talked about this morning, and all of a sudden your world changes and you're on a sort of an acquisition process. So how does that come about?
Sure. I think it started with us like pissing people off and getting their attention, right? Basically, we were doing all the marketing things that we were talking about before, and that was gathering people's attention. And I think, larger incumbents who were in the space were like, who the hell are these people? Like, what are they doing? And so they would get to know us. I think that's the first point. You have to do what you're doing really, really well. And it's a bit of a Tao. Has anyone's ever seen the movie The Tao of Steve? Hilarious movie. But in it, there's a bunch of great ideas, including this idea that like we're attracted to that which retreats from us. So I think if you spend all day long trying to like sell your company, that's not a good thing. And there's a saying, you want to get bought, not sold. And so the best way to get bought is to build an amazing product, focus on whatever it is that you're doing well. So, but along that process, I think something I would say that we understood, because we had been through a sale, was a mistake that people think, is they think that they get bought by companies. That's bullshit. Companies don't buy you. You get bought by a person. Some person inside of a company has the budget, the authority, the responsibility, and the willingness to believe in you to say, okay, I authorize it. At Salesforce, you need an executive sponsor, you need to get the CEO line, you need to get a bunch of people, but someone has to go around and bang the drum for that. Because generally, even in a highly acquisitive company like Salesforce, like an acquisition is not the normal course of things, right? That's not how you run your business. So that's the second thing that we knew, is we knew that there were specific people that would be part of this decision. And so we made it our business to figure out who these people were. Not that we wanted to sell our business to them, we just kind of knew who they were. We would see them at conferences and we kind of would navigate. And it's exactly like in a sale process. You're selling a product, there's a buyer, and you're trying to figure out like who has the budget, who has the authority. So the third point then was around Ripple. We knew those people, we just continued to do what we were doing, but we never set out to say, okay, well, we got to go sell the company. What we set out to do was raise more money. And by the way, I would also say, this is, I think, another misnomer. Maybe I'm being controversial with this, but is that once you raise equity, you've already sold your company, right? You're selling part of the company. It's sort of like the old saying, like I'm trying to remember who it was, guy offers a woman, $20, $1 million to sleep with him, and she says, okay, and then he says, well, how about $20? And she says, what do you think I am? And he says, well, we already established that. We're just negotiating on price right now. I totally missed that joke up. But, the point is, once you've sold a chunk of your company, you've sold it. And I think we heard it from John, like the investors who take that money in, they're not giving it to you because they think they're like, well, see you in 100 years. No, they want to get it back. In fact, they want to get it back like 5, 10, 3, whatever it is, times more. And so that means that there's this pressure on you to get that going. So we went through a sales process, which was, I think my point is that like raising money at any stage, every time you do it, it opens the possibility of an exit. And as we went through the process, we literally did get a phone call from Salesforce one day, but it wasn't just one phone call. There was a guy on the corporate development team who was just calling to see, we want to learn about you. So we talked to him. And then we just kept bumping into people from Salesforce all over. And we bumped into people from SuccessFactors, which was the other company that was interested in buying us at the same time. Lots of other companies too. But ultimately, we went through this process and said, look, we just want to raise money. We did it. And then in our case, and I think this is like, you could not make this up, but we were in a board meeting trying to figure out who do we take our investment capital from. We had a venture capitalist and then 2 strategic investors, both of whom we thought might want to buy us, but it's an investment. And then literally in the board meeting, my co-founder and I got Facebook messages from Mark Benioff. He sent us a Facebook message, can you call me? Here's my number. And then I said to the board, do you mind if I take this call? And they said, sure. So I went out and he said, look, I want to buy the business. Here's why I want to buy your business. And then we started talking about it. So look, a long answer, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think that first of all, the title of this thing, it's very rare that someone just calls you up out of the blue and says, I want to buy your company, right? It just doesn't happen like that. They, in the same way that, you don't meet people generally on a first date and decide to get married. And I don't think those marriages tend to work out that well, maybe. You got to date for a while first with investors and with acquirers. So I think the key point is what do is know that you're starting to date. And you start getting to know these people and understanding it.
Invest in those relationships.
Yeah. I can double click and go a lot deeper onto that, but I just wanted to tell the story and kind of explain it's not like someone just called up and said, you've won the lottery, right? It doesn't happen like that. There's a bit of effort on your side, and frankly, it's a really weird type of effort because the second, just like dating, the second you try, you immediately remove the likelihood that that's going to happen, right? I hate to make the analogy too much. At least maybe I'm leaving my bad romantic projections from when I was a kid. But if I was super keen on something, it tended not to happen.
Right. So Jeff, you mentioned earlier you kind of 2 different processes, the 2 companies that you've sold. So any comments on that from that perspective?
Yeah, so a couple of things. The first company, we were in the enterprise software space, so we made back office operations for large telcos, banks, insurance companies, predominantly in Western Europe, some Eastern European customers, and some Asia Pac clients when we exited. We made them more efficient by a magnitude of about 24%. We started the company with one intention, and there's myself and a co-founder with a 5-year horizon that we wanted to exit. And our thesis behind that was what would maximize individual returns to us as shareholders. The second core principle is that we were going to remain private, and we bootstrapped the whole thing. So that was our motivation, but just because that was our motivation didn't exclude us from building a great company, building a great product, and selling. We had a focus on sales from day one. So if we didn't have the focus on sales in day one, we wouldn't have created tension. We had a list of 5 acquirers on day 2 of the company, and we had a strategy as to who are the heroes that we need to make even bigger heroes in each of these companies. And it became a sales strategy. Granted, we were selling the company, but in order to execute on that, we actually had to sell the product. We had to sell the product to their competitors. We had to win new logos for each of those companies and steal business away from the other ones. It was very engineered over the course of 31 months to create that. And then lo and behold, one day, somebody opened up the conversation of, you're a really great partner. You've delivered X in millions of dollars of revenue to us. That was their product. And we got, obviously a really nice commission on that and product sales from it. It'd be great to have you part of the family. And so they didn't call. Like, it wasn't like an M&A guy that said, hey, we want to buy you, here's a check. Would have loved to have gotten a Facebook message from Benioff, but the conversation just sort of starts, and it's much like dating, you sort of see somebody that's of interest, and you're like, hey, do you want to go grab a coffee, grab a tea, go see a movie, go for dinner, and it kind of goes from there. The second one was a sales call, and we just exited in January. I thought it was the worst sales call in the world. Had no plans on any exit. We were toying with the idea of doing a round of about $3 million to invest in sales and marketing. We were in the process and closed a 7-figure deal with a big cloud provider 3 weeks before we closed the acquisition. So my Christmas holidays were extremely busy closing business and closing the deal. That one came out of the blue. And back to vision. So earlier this morning we talked a lot about vision. Our visions were completely aligned. And it was an easy decision to make to say that we were better together than we were competing with each other. And that's the trajectory that we were on. We were going to end up competing with live ops probably in the course of 12 to 18 months. But it was shared vision that actually resulted in that sale converting over to an acquisition.
So let's go back to the Facebook message from Benioff. So things escalate quickly. Now you're in a process. Diligence starts, but you've still got to run a business and execute the vision. I mean, how do you balance that as that comes along?
Yeah. So couple thoughts. So we had met them a number of times. We had met Mark. I mean, he just used Facebook because he figured that would be a fast way to get a hold. It wasn't the cold Facebook message. That would be awesome. You have a new friend. Just to clarify. In terms of that definitely is one of the most challenging things. And I think first step is I think Canadians, and especially, you hear Harley and you hear John, and I love these guys, but we have sort of unicorn-itis, which is we're obsessed that we're not really a real tech community until we have multiple $10 billion companies, and anyone who tries to leave earlier, it's some sort of failing. I just don't think that's true. I think it's awesome to build multi-billion-dollar companies. I think there's a fair amount of stochastic, it's sort of randomness that happens, but a lot of that is a lot of at-bats. So if you look at Silicon Valley, there are thousands of sales of companies all the time. I mean, that's how it works. It's not a bad indicator of the health of our ecosystem for companies to sell and get sold. Okay, so why did I say that? It's because I think a lot of us carry this mission that we're not just trying to build our own company, we're trying to change the country and and it's all great stuff, but I got news for you, and I think John said it. Don't wait for the government, and not only that, the best way to build Halifax, the best way to build Waterloo, the best way to build Toronto is build your own kick-ass company. And if you want to sell it, because that's what you want to do for your life, and it's the right situation, the right time, you go ahead and do that. You can always do another one. You can invest in other companies, you can advise, there's lots of ways to contribute. The reason I start off with that is because you have to first get the mindset that okay, this is a process, I have to do it, and I can't be emotional about it, okay? Because if you're all the time vacillating between I don't want to do this, it's my meaning in life is this business, it doesn't really work very well. You freak everybody out, okay? So second thing is don't freak everybody out, which means do not run out of that office and tell everybody in the company, awesome, we're gonna get bought. That is a terrifying thing for people, because for most people in the world, including entrepreneurs, uncertainty is the thing that makes you crazy, right? I don't know what's gonna happen. And so people are happy, they're working for your startup, they've got a job, they know what's going on, and they're not you. They're not gonna get a multi-million-dollar check, they're gonna get a paycheck, and all of a sudden you're oh, you're not gonna get a paycheck, and your boss is gonna be different. So don't run off and tell everybody, okay? Tell the very smallest number of people that you can tell, and still maintain it. I'm not trying to be a secrecy freak here. In most things, I was open about everything. At Ripple, we told everything about everything that was happening, except for people's salaries. You could see any number, but we didn't talk about this, okay? Because it was not productive. The third is, you need a good cover story if you're gonna go do that. And the best cover story for this was exactly what was really, the truth that really helps was, we're really trying to raise money here. So all the diligence, all the process, all that stuff, you do it in the context of we're thinking about raising money, we're thinking about a partnership relationship. Now, most people start to figure it out. And I think the next thing that happens when you talk about how do you run that process with people and still run your business is that they're gonna come to you and they're gonna say, I don't think this is really fundraising, or is something going on? And I think in that pace, you actually have to tell people the truth. I think being a liar and then coming out afterwards is a very, very bad thing for people. you have to continue to run the business and sell. In fact, that's the most stressful thing, because most of these companies, like I remember like literally sending Mark an email every time we were like, hey, we closed LinkedIn, check it out. Like, you should do this deal if you're gonna do it, right? And you have to keep winning, right? Like, the worst thing that could happen is like you start not winning because you're focused on this diligence process. Last thing I'd say is you can use it to your advantage. Like, don't be too eager, okay? So you're like, look, I'm sorry this deck isn't awesome and I don't have the whole thing, but I got people out running a business and selling, and so you're gonna get this time and that's it. I think I'll underline the last point, and by the way, like, I don't wanna tell too many tales out of school because I'm up here and not Devin, but like, I'm an amateur compared to that guy. He was awesome, and I was watching from both sides of what was going on, which is this idea that like, you cannot be too eager. Like, the most powerful moment, that like everything you've worked for 10 years is gonna come down to like, what is the number? What's the value? And if you're over eager, that number can be 20, 30, 40% lower than what you think it could be. So you've gotta be pretty cool and calm. And the way you, by the way, stay really confident is you keep running your business. And you're like, well, buy me if you want. Don't buy me because things are going great. And the last thing I'd say is like, how do you run that process with your people when you finally do tell them? I think you need to, you just need to do everything in your power to make sure you take care of people. And I think that's not just about like, that's just the right thing to do. It's also the right thing to make sure that the thing that you sold, which is an asset made up of these people, is actually there on the day that you're supposed to deliver it. Because companies do collapse between the time, like, you think that it's like, yeah, you're gonna get bought, the deal's announced, and they send you a check the next day. It never happens like that. It can be a month, 2 months, 3 months before you close. And I think Mike Litt said it this morning, Paul Graham said, never celebrate until the check is in the bank account. I mean, literally, you wait until the money clears your account, then you celebrate. You're like, get a call from the banker, and they're like, hi, yes, the check is there. Until then, all sorts of shit could happen. And the most brutal stuff is that like, you get overeager, you treat your people like shit. In that process, they leave. And almost all these deals have a material out clause. If half your staff leave, if this key person leaves. So just from a practical perspective, but also frankly because it's the right thing to do, make sure your people are taken care of.
Any thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I found that with the folks I've worked with, and I don't know if it's a trait of developers, but they tend to like a little bit of certainty in their life. And walking in, excited, and most founders, have a good portion of the company in shares. So you're excited, but you have to temper that a bit. Keep it to a close group of folks and really the key individuals. And I always had a named list of these are the folks who are in the know. You are not to contact anybody else in my company unless they're on this list, and I expect the same from you. And really kind of, and I'm really transparent. Like Dan, we shared everything except for salaries. I'm not a big believer in sharing everybody's salary with everybody else, but that was the one thing that I kept in a fairly close list of folks. So yeah, and then when you actually get the deal done, I would have spent a lot of time with the head of HR in both companies. So Alcatel-Lucent acquired my first and LiveOps the second. A lot ensuring that the comp plans for each individual employee were spot on. They had to be motivated, and salary is a big thing. There's a salary adjustment. We were early stage, and our salaries would have reflected that. Our options reflected it as well. So they benefited both ways. But the salary and overall comp plan had to look really good day one, and had to have some incentives to stay for 3 months and 6 months with touch points in each of those. So they were motivated after the deal. And it's a bit like honeymoon, like everybody's excited right after the wedding, and it starts to wear off, after a couple of weeks and then a couple of months. Went from a really small, scrappy little startup, and the culture around that is very nice. And now we work for, LiveOps is a little over 400 people. Small company, but it's different. Alcatel-Lucent was 20,000 people. Very, very different culture, particularly with a Parisian company. So make sure that you respect the culture.
That's great.
Sorry, one other thing I was going to say on that process, and I think you might agree with this. This is like, I see this with CEOs who are going to go through that process. One of my great mentors, an investor in Ripple, is this guy named Seymour Schulich, pretty famous. He has a law school out here named after him. He's got a bunch of schools. He's a very famous Canadian billionaire. And he's like, I'll tell you, I became a billionaire by don't be too tough and don't be too smart. And that's a very, very valuable lesson that I learned more about, is that like, don't be too cute with people who are coming to acquire you. Because I'll tell you something, they've done this more times than you've done it. They have guaranteed done it more times in terms of the terms. And so you think you're giving like this like really great, mind meld. You're like, no, I've got 7 other acquirers, and trust me, I'm not that interested. Like, they know. Yep. So just be very careful about playing poker when you're not a professional poker player, right? Like, it's just not great. Now, if you happen to be awesome at it, it's great. You should use it. And I'm telling you, there's a balance here. But too tough, too smart, it ends up like the deal blew up. And you see these guys all the time. I feel bad for them. I'm like, you had it. You could have done it. Right. Just remember, there's someone on the other side, like, they're not making $10 million or 20 or $100 million. This is just their job. And if the deal falls away, it falls away. They'll find another deal.
They have a pipeline of deals.
Yeah.
They just happen to pick yours. It's a lot like investors, I think, Patrick,
Yep.
where you have a pipeline of opportunities
Sure.
that you'll invest in. You'll roll the dice on this one, and they have a certain patience factor. And if you're too difficult to get a deal done with in whatever time frame they have, and I'm convinced they all have an MBO for the quarter, they'll move on to the next one that's as sexy as you and probably has a lot of similarities to what you're doing as well. So don't be too cute, particularly if it's your first time through. I've been through it twice, and was pretty cautious the second time around as well.
That's a great segue into some of the sort of nuts and bolts. So, I mean, obviously, everybody's focused on the number. We all understand that. There's lots of other terms in an LOI and an agreement of purchase and sale. What are the big ones to look out for these guys? I mean, what should they be thinking about beyond just valuation? I mean, what are the important material terms when you're getting acquired?
Oh, take a cut.
Yeah. So on the LOI, I've always used it as a bit of a test as to how serious they are, both in terms of the time it took them to turn it around. So there's an expression of interest, over the phone or in a meeting. Great, paper it. Put it on. It's 4 or 5 pages. They're stocked, like it's pretty standard stuff. So the time it takes them to turn it around is an indicator as to how interested they are in the deal and how quickly I think that they can move things through the diligence process to close. But then there's just like key things. The biggest one for me is the exclusivity period and how you get out of it. And make sure that once you sign that LOI and you're locked in exclusivity, that you try and negotiate equal rights. Usually the buyer has the option to pull out, and then you're locked in for a period of time afterwards. Ensure that you have some opportunities to pull out if it's not looking right to you as well. So that's the number one thing. The numbers and all that, they have to make sense. I mean, that's a pretty obvious thing. But the rest of it, really look for exclusivity periods and as much terms you can get that are favorable towards you as the acquired.
Yeah, so a few things. 2, not having to do with terms. 1 is the culture of the place you're going to go to. It sort of relates to the second point, which is your personal lockup. I hate to burst anyone's bubble, but it's extremely rare for a tech company to get bought and they're like, well, that's great, here's your check, see you later. No. They want you because they're buying you. They're buying the talent. And if you're the leader, you're sticking around for a while, which is not bad. I love being at Salesforce. I've had a great experience. But we were very, very careful to learn about the culture of Salesforce and what it was like to be an entrepreneur in there. I remember talking to Jevin before, and I talked to Alex Bart. I talked to people. I used my network as much as I could to talk to everybody I knew who had been there, who had left there. What's it like? Because we were signing up for a period of time. And when we sold Infor and I ran that deal, I structured my deal so that I was terminated on the day that we closed. It was funny. The guy on the other side was like, I've never had anybody ask me to get fired before, but I kind of knew what it was going to be like there. So that's sort of a cultural diligence that you need to understand about. And the second thing is know why they're buying you. Sometimes people are totally misaligned. They think they're buying the technology. What they really want is you, and you're fighting back on this long retention thing. And you're guess what? That's what they're paying for. So don't fight so much. Or if you don't want to do that, don't do it. So then we go to the term of your contract. So a couple things that I think are pretty important, and this is about you as a founder. You're going to have some sort of earnout, so know how long it is and what are the terms, and learn, very importantly, how it can be taken away from you. Is it because they decide you're not the right person, and then a lot of equity walks away? Is it because they fired you? Is it because they fired you for cause? Is it because they fired you for cause and you've been convicted in a court of competent jurisdiction? Basically impossible. You got to figure that out so you protect yourself if you're leaving something behind. The other parts about the term sheet, I think you're totally right. Understand this: people do not like being retraded. So if I spent some time in a law firm and an investment bank. Retrading means I thought we had a deal, and now you're changing the terms of the deal. These people take that in terms of interest very, very seriously because probably the M&A team or the executive sponsor had to go to a board or a CEO and say, I'm going to go do this. Is that okay? And they've just been given the rope. They can't go back. In fact, they'd rather slit their throats than go back and say, well, it's a different deal than what I told you it was going to be. it's more money, we don't get all the exec team. Like, they won't do that. So pay attention to what's on that term sheet. It's not just because it's not legally binding doesn't mean it's not going to define the terms of what you're actually going to have to deal when you do the definitive agreement. I think other tips on that, like transactional process, if you can, if it's an American buyer buying a Canadian company, try and find a law firm in Canada who represented the last company they bought here. Doesn't always work out that way, but boy, it's awesome, because then the acquirer can't say, well, this is how we do it. They say, no, we know what you did last time. The M&A guys in Salesforce are going to kill me for saying that. What are the things about the kind of terms of the transaction? Like, go back to the thing is like, how are they going to take care of your people? And then the last thing I'd say is, just because your uncle's buddy is a great real estate lawyer does not mean they will know how to negotiate an M&A transaction with a sophisticated buyer, typically a U.S. buyer. And like I said, they've done it before many more times than you've done it, and you want somebody on the other side who at least has the competency to understand, for example, how will the accounting of your unvested options be taken care of in the consideration price? Are you paying for that, or is the acquirer going to pay for it and pick it up? That can be a swing of millions of dollars in any transaction, and it's sort of like a really obscure thing. Your lawyer actually should be able to read the document and understand the math of it. So basically, make sure your lawyer knows how to do math, okay, and can translate and has some sophistication about understanding it. Otherwise, you will get screwed. There's just no question about it.
And just to pick up on it, good law firm is absolutely critical. If it's a U.S. buyer, make sure that you have U.S. counsel representing you as well, either through the Canadian firm or go find somebody. The other thing to add is on the tax side of things. Depending upon how the deal is structured, don't rely on your law firm to be a tax accountant. Go and hire top-shelf tax accountants. They're the usual suspects, the big five who are around. They have been invaluable in both of my exits, absolutely invaluable. After the first one, we were audited by CRA. And I was so thankful, so thankful that the group that I had hired out of Mississauga, I was looking for folks that had international SaaS exit experience of Canadian companies, and I had to go to Toronto to get that. It wasn't here in Atlantic Canada. I was so thankful I did that from day one. They were brought in as soon as the LOI came in. They looked at it, said, yeah, this looks good. The second exit, the LOI came in, and said, this is amazing. It's like you wrote it yourself, and just sign it and don't negotiate anything, and let's move forward. So hire good tax accountants that really understand it, and don't, under any circumstance, pretend that you're a lawyer or a tax accountant. If you are, that's fine, but don't be relying on Google to give you advice.
Yeah.
Please don't.
Yeah, just on that point, I'll give you a subtle difference where it makes a difference. You think, oh, I'll save myself 40 grand or something like that, because it's expensive to hire a high-end tax lawyer or tax accountant, and they're going to be different, by the way. So remember, I said most deals will incur, you'll get something up front and then some sort of earnout. Almost, that's pretty typical. Well, depending on the exact language that's used to characterize your earnout, okay, it's exactly the same economics for you, but the language, the way it's framed, you can either have the CRA say, well, that's income, you pay 50% tax on that, roughly, or no, that's a capital gain, you pay 23% tax. That's a humongous change, right? That's a big deal. So make sure you spend the money on getting a good tax lawyer as you go through that stuff.
That's great.
Let you go.
We got about 10 minutes left, so I think I'm going to turn it over to our audience. We'll take questions. Someone over here? Oh.
Can you guys elaborate a little bit on the timing of hiring?
Yeah. Again, I think it depends on where you are as a business and what you're doing, right? Like if you're, and what you've done before. So in the case of WorkBrain, right, we're a public company, and we actually actively hired an investment bank and ran around the world, flying around, doing shows and trying to sell the business. Had another investment bank. So that was part of the process, and there was just no way we could do it because as a public company, you have enormous amounts of sort of fiduciary responsibility to prove that you got the best possible price. As a private company, you don't need to do that, and I think, so a couple things. I think, just being on the other side, I think it's the kiss of death to hire a small investment bank or advisory firm to help sell your company. That's I mean, literally, those come across my transom, I hit delete, I don't even read them. Because a business that's in that state and it's just mass emailing, you should buy this, is generally not a business that people want to buy. So that's the first point about hiring them. You get a lot of inbound, oh, I can help you. I don't think they will. I think they'll hurt you. And that, by the way, also goes for venture capital. I think most venture capitalists, if they get an agent-driven deal, they're like, don't want to talk to this person. Sorry for all the advisors in the room. I think you need to hire your lawyer before you hire an investment banker advisor. But I think, getting to know who could help you when the term sheet comes in, and your lawyer should be able to find it. If you have a good deal lawyer, they'll be like, okay, look, I can't give you a financial valuation opinion on this thing. And like I said, I think if you're a small business, you own most of it, you don't really always need an advisor, like a bank advisor. You need a great lawyer, because that's where most of it will get done, who's done it a number of times before. If you've got venture capitalists on the deal, they're going to be like, I think we should get an advisor just to help us out. What they're really saying is, I want to make sure that you, as the entrepreneur, are not prejudicing, because you're going to make a bunch of money, but I want to maximize everything. So you might, want to bring them in and bring them in at the right time once the process is started. And I think the last thing I'd say is, these guys love to tell you how they know how to run a process. That's great. You're the CEO. It's your company. You decide when and how you want things to happen. Remember, they have a fee incentive to get this deal done and move on to the next one. They're not any different from the contractor who you hire to paint your house, and then it's half done and they've got the next job. You're like, why have you finished? Same thing.
So my experience was a little bit different. We didn't need investment bankers, and we weren't flying around the world with anybody. I mentioned earlier, I brought advisors in. As soon as I knew I had a good LOI, we negotiated back and forth a couple of turns on it. Some were important deal breakers for us. Others were, listen, I'll live with it. But as soon as we got to a good LOI prior to signing, both tax accountants and corporate lawyers in the U.S. and Canada take a look at it, and then they're on board. And you haven't done something to box yourself in a corner inadvertently that causes problems for them in diligence and towards a close. So I'm a big believer in bringing those hired guns in before you sign the LOI. But as a small company, neither of those companies had boards. I was the only director in both companies. So I relied a lot on personal advisors and coaches. The first one was really hard to exit. And you'd think that sounds really strange when I said, our investment thesis was we maximize shareholder return with an exit in 5 years. You would think that if somebody wanted to have us join their family that in 30 months, that would be a good thing. It was incredibly hard, and it took me about 2 weeks to figure out whether we wanted to even have the discussion. And it was one 15-minute chat that sort of screwed my head on straight and said, it sounds like it's a good thing. You like the number? I'm like, yeah, I absolutely love the number if we could get it done. So why aren't you doing it? So bring in personal advisors and coaches and mentors, to help you through that process in the early days before you flip over to the hired gun advisors.
Just one other thing about the advisor thing is, I think if you do bring them on, and so we were the same, we did the LOA for the second time around, is you should use them, right? You're in charge, you do it, but you have to use them strategically. And so here's what I mean. Do not be on every call with the lawyers on the other side. Do not be on every call where you do due diligence. You actually want a little bit of distance as the CEO. So a couple things can happen. One, so you can blame the inevitable arguments and fights that occur between deal lawyers. Oh, that's just them. Let's just, I'll be the mature adult and let's just sort this out. We can talk about it later. The other thing is it allows you the privilege of coming back when everything is sorted out. There's always going to be 2 or 3 deal issues that they have and 2 or 3 things that are really important to you. I suggest you not tell them what's really important to you at the very beginning of the process, okay? You might want to there are going to be things that you care about. Is it the duration of time? Is it the amount of cash versus stock? Is it how your employees get? Just keep that right to your chest. And then at the very last part of it, once everything's been done, you can come in and say, this is how I want to deal with these things. We still haven't closed these off, and that has to get done. If you're in every call, every meeting, you lose all power as a CEO. You're just some other person. And the third thing why you want to do this is that almost every deal I've been part of, financing, whatever, there's something called deal fatigue that happens. And it's when you get smart people arguing at each other on 42 phone calls over this 17-page document or 70-page document. They just everyone gets angry at the end and they're like, oh, it's going to fall apart. Okay, don't freak out. It's not going to fall apart. You just need to say, everybody calm down. You have a bit of deal fatigue. Let's just take a step back. Remember why we're trying to do this thing. And then you can bring it in. If you've been in every call and you're the one who's deal fatigued and angry because you hate the junior lawyer on the other side, you won't be able to do that.
I like the term deal fatigue.
Yeah.
December 24th last year, 7 o'clock at night, was on a call with the head of Corp Dev M&A, Live Ops. their outside counsel and our counsel. And I'm like, gents, I have better things to do on the 24th of December, and I'm sure that you all have something better to do at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in San Francisco. Let's take 3 days. And it was a beautiful cooling off period. And the lawyers were arguing over one long paragraph that stretched 2 pages. Our lawyer wanted it broken down into 6 sections. And I'm like, I can't believe that we're having this conversation. I got pulled into this conversation, and so I pulled the chute for 3 days over the holidays. Probably the best thing that we did. Had we not done that, we probably would have gotten really upset, and one of us would have walked away.
Yeah. Right here.
So the question that I'm asking is, if the company has gotten to the stage where the right thing is to sell, the founders have decided it is the right thing to do, what's the right process?
Yeah, so you're saying you want to sell, and you're at the time where you do really want to sell. I just think you have to be, so if you're on your own, you have 2 paths. You can get an advisor to run a process, which is what I'm describing. And they're going to put a roadshow deck together, and they'll shop you around. And if you got someone who's like a smarter than average bear, they'll be subtle about it, but it's still going to be a process, and like everyone will know you're for sale. And so, that's probably something you want to avoid if you can. So if you have the time and the inclination, you say, okay, well, how do I engineer this soft landing? How do I say, this is going to take a year. It's a year-long process. And it's a sales process, just like closing your big deal. And it's sort of what I alluded to at the beginning. You figure out who your acquirers are, but you figure out who's the person inside those places that could buy me. How do you get to them in a way that's not like, hi, I'd like to tell you about buying my company. You meet them at a conference. You get introduced by a friend. You host a dinner. Like, you slowly start to build up this process. And then you also start figuring out inside that large organization who could buy you, how do you build fans and allies who all of them are saying the same thing? We should buy this business. This is a great team. This is a great opportunity. We're making money. And so, like, the short answer is you decide that you're willing to do it, but you start essentially strategically winning against these targets. You're partnering with them. You're getting to their events. You're part of their ecosystem. You build on their platforms. You co-sell with their field salespeople. Like, you go all in against a couple of places. And that's a strategy that, like, as between like calling them up at the head of M&A and say, I want to sell today, can result in literally 200, 300, 400% more value created over the course of 12 months.
I think we've got time for one more question. Right here in the middle.
You both talked about taking care of your team at any stage in this process. What are the steps that you actually take so that you are taking care of your team as you're talking about a potential deal?
Just in case people back couldn't hear it, so what are the steps that you actually take to take care of your team during the process of an acquisition?
Make sure they all get like free home cleaning. That's the trick.
So I mentioned earlier, the big component for me was ensuring that every individual was treated fairly in terms of their comp plan, because they're going from, if you're sophisticated enough as an early stage or a younger company to have, salary bands and all this sophisticated HR stuff, that's one thing, but they have bands. And it's important to understand where the employees are, which band they're in, where they are in the band, what's the upward progression, what is managerial discretion for salary top-ups and increase versus, a big mammoth process for that. I would have spent a lot of time in both exits on those topics. And in both, we were pretty much disconnected on where I thought the employees were in terms of banding and where they thought they were. And I think part of that was they just weren't familiar with the employees as I was. So the news was well received when they understood their total compensation package, understood why we were doing this and the rationale and logic behind it, and knew that they were being fairly treated as option holders, vested or unvested, or shareholders had they exercised their options. So you have to answer every question when you're ready to announce to the employee team prior to closing.
So a few thoughts on it. First is around your own personal comportment. I think we alluded to it earlier, but like, remember that you're ecstatic because you're getting this exit and all this money, and these are people who are on the ride with you, and they might not be as happy as you are with the outcome because it's not a $10 billion outcome. For you, it makes sense, but for them, it doesn't. And now they're going to have this new boss. So I think you just need to personally manage your own enthusiasm and excitement and be extremely good at listening to people all the way through the process. Like, I want to talk, I'm here, if you have questions, concerns, let's talk. That also means you have to educate yourself about what the answers to these questions are, and if you don't get them, you have to follow through. I want to find out about it. Goes to the next point. Recognize that as an acquiree, you have a ton of power up until the day that it closes, and then you're just another employee. Okay? Use the power, right? because they do want to do the deal. There's momentum, right? And if people are not being treated well, you need to go up the chain and say, look, I don't think I've got transparency about how you're dealing with this or what's doing, and I'm not happy about that. It's not good. They're going to respond at that time. But once the deal's done, they're like, go talk to HR. I mean, that's not quite like that, but I think so. That's the second point. Use your power when you can, because it goes away at the end. I think the third part about like taking care of employees is exactly that. They're going to give you probably, they don't know your people. So pay attention when they say, well, who are the key people in the company? Make sure that's key people. And frankly, you might know that there's someone who is key but doesn't want to stick around. Don't put them on the list, okay? And then you got to work your way down the list and start thinking about all the other people and what their banding is right. The other thing is they'll often give you equity, so make sure you think about how you grant it out. And the fourth thing I'd say, you can believe in karma, or you can believe that life is long, and I think it's a rational decision. I mean, I'm 40, I'm planning and hopefully starting companies again in the future, and hopefully the best people are some people that you worked with before. People's memories are long, and if you act like a jerk and don't take care of them, they will remember. So it's self-interested to a certain extent. You can't screw people. So how does that play out? I'm just telling you honestly, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm maybe take it a very cold, rational way. Our board knew that we were owed a bunch of bonuses. We hadn't taken bonuses. And we said, look, we're making a ton of money. Just give it to all our people. Give it to these people. And that was really, really appreciated, right? They understood why. And then we got a bunch of stock from Salesforce as individuals. They said, you can give it to anybody you want. But if you give it to just yourselves, we're okay with that. And we didn't do that. We gave it away to a ton of people who were with us. And again, they knew about it. It made a difference to them. And then the last thing is, and I know this is public, but like, in certain cases, certain people were along the ride all the way, and it just wasn't as good for them as we wanted to be. I'll tell you a couple amazing things. One of our investors went in and knew one of our founders really well, and basically just topped him up and gave him money because he wanted him to make at least $1 million out of this, and just said, we had a lot of super wealthy investors. He was like, just go. You did such a great job. If you can facilitate, that's amazing. The other thing you can facilitate is like just little things, like take people and their wives out to dinner and say thank you. We tried to do that. I sent people away on vacations. Just like, do it, and do it quickly. Don't wait 6 months or something like that. Do as best you can to try and take care of people. Be very responsive. I think that's how you take care of people when that happens. The other thing I'd say though is remember, and you probably figured this out because if you're a CEO for long enough, by the time it gets to sell your company, you've learned this lesson. You can't make everybody happy. Okay, there will be people who think you're assholes. There will be people who think you weren't treating them nicely. You can't lose sleep forever that you didn't make everybody happy.
Well, that's great. We're out of time. Thanks to Jeff and Jan for joining us this afternoon. That's been awesome.